Hey, it's Norbert Orlewicz here, and I want to welcome you to another conversation here, a Renegade Conversation. In this episode, I want to start exploring and start a conversation and really start talking about some of the deeper roots of the crisis and the problems that we are facing as a society and a civilization. There's a lot of problems in the world today. And what's interesting to me is the problems that are accepted by the mainstream, the problems that we're supposed to be focusing and supposed to be arguing about, right? Those problems that everybody knows about, they're highlighted on the mainstream news. And these are the problems that we're supposed to be engaged in solving. And what's interesting about these problems is, for me, they really seem to be surface level problems. To me, and maybe you'll agree with me, these problems feel a lot more like symptoms and not the real root causes of the issues and dysfunctions in our society. And so my interest is getting at the root of the problems and having conversations that go beyond political, religious, racial, societal, and economic lines. I hope that you find it just as frustrating to see every challenge and every problem simply devolve into left and right type of thinking. Almost everything right now seems to devolve into a political conversation. But it seems like every one of these problems that we're supposed to be focusing on, which are really just symptoms, every one of these problems, you'll notice, are creating more division, divisiveness, and polarity. Every one of these problems has a side you're supposed to choose and then fight with the other side. And it just creates more division and more chaos. And instead of solving anything, it actually creates a larger problem of dysfunction and inequality and oppression, which is really what I want to get at. I want to get at the root. To get at the root, we really have to start looking at our existence, at really what is it that our entire system of organization, our system of existence is based on. And so we have to look at our society and our civilization and the history of our civilization. And it brings to mind a book that for me was very profound. This book right here, The Culture of Make-Believe by Derrick Jensen. I'm sure you've got books in your life that have been very, influential and impactful on your worldview and your perspective of reality and your awareness of your existence within reality and your relationship with the world. This is one of these books. For me, I read this book in my early 20s, and I was going through a spiritual awakening, a spiritual growth in my early 20s. I had just moved out from Toronto out to British Columbia. I was in the middle of attending theater school at that time, and I was studying mythology, psychology, history, cultural history, civilization, religious history, all self-study, not in school, self-directed. And I came across this book. Now, at that time, in my early 20s, I was very much like most, I would think, young people are idealistic about the world. And you see a lot that's wrong in the world, as we all do. And as you grow up and start a family and start a career and start building a life for yourself, you're almost forced to ignore and leave behind some of that idealism because you have practical things to attend to. A house for your family, a roof over their heads, food on the dinner table. And so those practical things kind of take over. But the things that I learned from this book and the perspective that was given to me by Mr. Jensen, by Derrick Jensen, was incredibly influential. And it tied into all of the other study that I was doing and the understanding of human psychology and all this kind of stuff. The basic premise of his book, The Culture of Make-Believe, is that we live in a culture, a fabricated culture. We live in an illusion. We pretend that we are civilized. We pretend that we are progressive. We pretend that we have evolved, that we have progressed, that we are unlike our ancestors of the past, that we have improved in so many ways. And yet, what his premise is that the foundation of civilization, by its very nature, is destructive. Civilization, by its very nature, is destructive and oppressive and violent and based on oppression, slavery, and violence. And it cannot exist any other way. And so, as we look to solve the problems that we're facing in our modern world, I don't think that looking at the symptoms and trying to solve the symptoms is going to solve the deeper root problems of what we're really facing. And I think that this is part of this great awakening that some people are talking about right now. And we do have, I believe, an incredible opportunity as a society, because more and more people from all sides of the political spectrum are becoming more aware of how dysfunctional our systems are. And one of the first rules of growth and personal development and solving problems is to first accept that there is a problem, is to first accept that there is an issue that needs to be resolved. And so as long as we continue to ignore the facts that our civilization is inherently dysfunctional and it cannot produce anything that is healthy and supportive of human life and supportive of the natural world, we will continue down this path of destruction, regardless of what political side of the spectrum you're on, regardless of what religion you belong to, regardless of what culture you belong to. There is no social justice fight. There is no equality. The solar energy and the removal of fossil fuels, none of that is going to solve the deeper problem of the fact that our culture, our civilization, is inherently destructive. And we're going towards a path of destruction and tyranny and oppression. And in fact, we are living in it every single day. The culture of make-believe, the whole point of this is that we're living in a culture based on oppression and death and murder and slavery, and we pretend like that's not the case. We pretend like we're not a part of it. And I think that's the difficult thing to accept. So this isn't a discussion about politics or religion or climate change or environmentalism or anything like that. We need to find ways, and we can discuss those things. And I want to have conversations about each of those different things and the symptoms that we're experiencing in our modern world. But this is a conversation to go deeper than that. This is a conversation to encourage you to, for a minute, let go of the beliefs that you might hold on to, the opinions, political, religious viewpoints you might hold on to. And what if we could just come to the table and agree on the fact that our civilization is inherently destructive and start a conversation from that place? What conversations could we have? What solutions could we find? But I went to Wikipedia to look up the definition of civilization, and it was actually interesting to read it because at first you've got kind of the basic definition of civilization, a complex society that's characterized by urban development, social stratification, a form of government, and symbolic systems of communication. But then it gets a little more interesting. They say civilization are intimately associated with and often have characteristics such as centralization, number one. So that's interesting because right now we have this trend towards decentralization. So, and I personally feel like decentralization is an answer to some of our problems, potentially. the domestication of plant and animal species, and I would argue human species as well. So the domestication, specialization of labor, culturally ingrained ideologies of progress and supremacism. I thought that was really interesting that they mentioned that. Culturally ingrained ideologies of progress and supremacism. And again, think of all historical civilizations, East and West, and the ideologies of supremacism that each one of those civilizations hold. Monumental architecture, taxation, social dependence on farming, and expansionism. Interesting again. This is what I found interesting here. Civilizations are organized, densely populated settlements divided into hierarchical social classes, which is exactly what we have. And I don't think there's any civilization that I can think of that is not divided and organized into hierarchical social classes with a ruling elite and a subordinate urban and rural populations. Now, for us in the modern world, especially in North America, we think of ourselves as living in a free country of equality, and we think of ourselves as equals. Culture of make-believe. Because is that really true? I think 2020, 2021 has shown us that that's not true. We are not equals. We are not free. We do not live in free countries. Democracy is not freedom. America is not a free country. Canada is not a free country. Australia, UK, not free countries, not one bit. We are subordinate under a ruling elite. I'd love to have a debate on that. I'd love to have a conversation on that. If somebody disagrees with that, I'd love to hear your perspective on that. But I don't see it any other way. I think it's very clear, crystal clear, that there is an elite that rules over us, and we are subordinate. I won't go as far as to say that we are slaves, although that argument could be made as well. But there are absolutely slaves in our midst, slave labor. You know, we can argue about that as well. But when you think about it, us here in the West, all of our conveniences, all of our wealth, all of our riches and comfortable living and entitlements, they came from somewhere. Those resources were mined somewhere. There was cheap labor. There were people that were forced to work for a pittance in order for us to have these conveniences, this technology that I'm using right now to record this video on. Let's not kid ourselves. Let's not live in a culture of make-believe. Do we have the courage to accept the reality of our civilization, as it says in the back here, the dark heart of our civilization? And I don't believe it's a human thing. Somebody might argue and say, oh, so you're saying that humans are intrinsically evil. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that civilizations and the way that we've organized ourselves into civilizations is dysfunctional and destructive. Look at the pillars. All we have to do is look at the creations of civilization. What has civilization created? And this is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Obviously, we have some amazing progress. We have incredible benefits of the civilizations that we've lived in. I'm not saying we should go back to hunter and gatherer societies, but we have an opportunity to move forward right now. We have a large part of the population that is becoming aware of the destructive nature of our existence. And so I do believe there is an opportunity to make a shift, to make a different decision, to move society in a different direction. And I'll tell you right now, I do not think that it's the elite, the ruling elite, that meets at Davos and the COP26 and runs the IMF and the WEF and the UN. I don't believe that it's the ruling elite that is going to solve these problems for us. We can have a discussion and conversation about that as well. But when we think about the pillars of civilization, right? And we can argue about that. What makes up the pillars of civilization? But let's look at the main ones, the core ones. Okay, law, governance, education, economy, religion. Just think about those systems in our current society. Those are the main things that have sprung up, that have been created from our civilization. Each one of these things are dysfunctional. Our legal system is dysfunctional. Our legal system is much more of a banking system. It's based on finances and economy. It is not just. Government. Government is not just. Government is dysfunctional. Government is bloated. And it's not about capitalism or socialism, communism, or democracy. We can argue about the pros and cons and the benefits of each, but none of those systems, I think we can all agree, are perfect. It's not as if we're looking for a perfect system, but can we find a better way? Is there a better option, or are these our only choices? I don't believe that they are. If we continue to look at our problems from the same level of thinking that created them, we can't ever find a new solution. And that's what I think is the problem in our society right now, is we're arguing about symptoms, but we can't find a new solution because we're not looking from a different perspective, from a different level of thinking. That's what I'm hoping to encourage here, and hoping to start a conversation to get us thinking outside of the box. Because all of these systems that we've created right now are fundamentally dysfunctional. Our economy, our fiat debt-based fractional reserve banking economy is a fraud. And yet, culture of make-believe. We live in this world pretending that it's all okay, and that somehow it's going to be sustainable and it's going to keep us growing. It doesn't make any sense. And we know that. We know that none of this makes sense. We know that all of these things are dysfunctional, and it's at that point where we can finally accept it and agree that these things are not working. Our governance isn't working. Our legal system isn't working. Our educational system isn't working. It's an old industrial-based educational system that was built to create good workers. It's not serving our children. It's not serving our communities. It's not serving our society. Religion, that's for another topic. So when you look at these fundamental pillars of society, you can see how each one of them are dysfunctional. And it's no wonder if they're springing forth from a system that's inherently dysfunctional and destructive. Now, obviously, this is a deep topic. It's a dark topic. I would love to hear from you. If you've read this book, I would love to hear from you, because I have not met many people who have read this book. But I'd love to hear if you have read this book, or if you've read any other of Derrick Jensen's work. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I've shared here today. Whether you agree or disagree with me, however you feel passionately about it, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear it in the comments, or maybe in reaction videos. Send us an email. I'd love to hear it, because I'd love to continue this conversation, kind of feed off some of the content, the comments, and the feedback that I receive. I definitely want to quote. I'm going to be reading out some of the different passages from this book. There's some really interesting and powerful concepts and analogies and stories that are shared to make his point. Derrick, this book is one of incredibly well-researched piece of work. And he draws some pretty eye-opening and brutal conclusions. It's not an easy read, I'll tell you that right now, but we are in a time in our lives, in society, where we need to have some difficult conversations, where we need to look at the difficult, ugly things in our world and in our society. And I think that's been the problem in the last 20 years, is life has been too good for us here in the West. And we don't want to look at these ugly things because that would threaten our existence and our entitlement. But for those of us who are awake to the dysfunctions in our society, I think it's up to us to have these difficult conversations. I think it's up to us to look at these dark parts of humanity and bring them to the surface and actually have conversations about it and deal with it instead of repressing and hiding, putting it under the carpet and ignoring it and pretending that we live in a progressive, civilized, enlightened world, because we don't. Let's face that reality and let's have some powerful conversations from this place. So if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed the points that I'm bringing up, please like, share, and comment. I would love to hear your views and your thoughts on this information. We're going to continue this conversation. I'm going to be sharing some more, some passages from the book, and we'll be talking about some different topics that stem from this conversation, from this topic, and we'll just see where the conversation goes.